So we're talking here with Howie Hawkins, who's a prominent member of the Green Party and a former member of the Teamsters. And how are you doing today, Howie?
I'm doing good.
Good. So I was wondering if you'd like to talk a little bit first about your background. You were a Teamster for many years, and maybe you could talk a little bit about that. If you were active in the Teamsters Union, and you know how that went.
Yeah, I spent my last 20 years working as a member of the Teamsters Union at UPS, unloading trucks. Before that, I worked in construction. And yeah, I was active in the union to the extent I could be. My local, pretty conservative local, every time I tried to raise something, I was called out of order at union meetings and told to go to the political action committee, but then nobody would tell me when the meetings were. And the couple times I wandered into the union hall and they were meeting, they were really upset. But so there was that. And then I was a member of Teamsters for Democratic Union and participated in their, reform campaigns to try to democratize the union. So
how about just around the issues of contracts, what was in the contracts, how contracts were enforced or not enforced, that sort of thing?
Yeah, that was a constant issue. We would get contracts, and the period I was in there, we were basically coasting on the good contract the Teamsters got with UPS from the 1997 strike. And every contract that the Hoffa administration agreed to was concessionary. So we fought against those contracts. We supported alternatives to Hoffa when we had elections of national officers. And, locally, yeah, we filed grievances. The ones I was involved in, we always won because, the supervisors and the bosses were in the wrong. So, that was a pretty regular thing. And I participated in those activities.
Mm-hmm. And then at what time did you get involved in the Green Party, and how would you just, my impression is that you kind of transitioned from principally being active in the Teamsters to your role in the Green Party. Is that right? And can you describe that process?
No, it's actually the opposite. I was committed to independent progressive politics from being a teenager, coming up in the San Francisco Bay Area. 1960, late 67, the Peace and Freedom Party was trying to get on a ballot, and I'm 15 years old, urging any adult I could get to listen to me to register in the party so they could get on a ballot. And so I was involved in the Peace and Freedom, and then the People's Party, and then the Citizens Party, and then the first National Green Party organizing meeting in 1984. I was there. And that's the party that survived and stuck around and persisted. And I've been involved ever since.
Okay. Well, I want to come back to that a little bit later, but as you know, there's a division, as you have explained, there's a division in the Green Party right now over the issue of support for Ukraine. And I wonder if you could talk about that division and your views of it.
Yeah, I think what's happening in the Green Party is reflective of what's happening with the ideological left in the United States and around the world. And I think what we're dealing with is a legacy of the old campus left, derived from the Communist Party, the Stalinists, and their position during the Cold War of supporting the so-called socialist camp, which were hardly socialist countries, and they weren't democratic at all. And then in this country, we have the legacy of, the Marcyite groups. Sam Marcy was a member of the Socialist Workers' Party, the Trotskyist group. And in the 50s, he wanted to support the Russian invasion of Hungary to suppress the workers' pro-democracy movement. And so he ended up forming the Workers' World Party, which is still with us, a very tiny group, but it and its derivative, the Party for Socialism and Liberation, have disproportionate influence in anti-war activities. And so I think within the Green Party, that campus position has influenced a lot of people. But it's a split, really 50-50 down the middle. The National Committee's had a couple votes, and the campus position won by just a few votes in each case. You know, like the last one was 54-50 with 11 abstentions. So, you know, the opposite position that I advocate and a lot of Greens support is an internationalist position. We should be in solidarity with people fighting exploitation and oppression around the world, including the Ukrainians fighting an invasion from Russia. And that's in the best traditions of green politics and socialist politics. So that's the debate in the Green Party right now.
Mm-hmm. You know, as you probably know, George Orwell commented in 1942 that pacifism in that situation meant being pro-Nazi. And how do you see, in light of what he had said, how do you see the whole so-called peace movement? And what is your view of calling for peace and being anti-war in the abstract in the example with in the case of the war in Ukraine?
Yeah, well, what these peace groups and pacifists are advocating is for the U.S. to stop sending arms to Ukraine. You know, and that's easy for them to say from their privileged perches in the U.S., where they don't have Russian bombs raining down on them and don't have invading soldiers coming to detain, torture, and rape them if they don't cooperate with the Russian occupation. It's not even anti-war, because if Ukraine is disarmed because the West stops sending them arms, it's not going to end the war. Russia's going to continue its invasion to recolonize Ukraine. So yeah, Orwell is right. In certain situations, to be pacifist is objectively to be pro-fascist. And that's what the Putin regime is. And, it's disappointing that a lot of the peace groups don't see that. They just sort of have a knee-jerk position that sending arms to anybody, anytime, anywhere is wrong. They don't distinguish between aggressors and people fighting back in their self-defense. And, that's a fundamental distinction that you've got to realize, or otherwise you're not really dealing with the violence in the war.
I have to comment, and maybe this was the case for you too, but when the invasion first started, I really had to struggle with myself around that issue of the U.S. sending arms to Ukraine, because it seemed to contradict everything that I had stood for 55 years, opposition to any U.S. military involvement anywhere. But then, as you point out, I had to think about, well, what does that mean concretely in this situation? And so, I realized exactly as you're saying that in this situation, it meant concretely supporting Putin. And so it involved a kind of a change in my mindset, at least superficially, and it seems to me that the majority of the left has been unable and unwilling to undergo that what seems to be a change in their mindset. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I was from the start, saying the Ukrainians need arms to defend themselves, because I've been following this since 2014, and realized that Russia wants to recolonize Ukraine. And I've been listening to the progressive forces in Ukraine, socialists, anarchists, feminists, environmentalists, the Green Party there, and trade unionists. And, so that wasn't an issue for me. And I think you're right that you just can't, it's understandable given the vicious nature of US imperialism, particularly in the Middle East and Latin America in recent decades, that your default position would be, well, if the U.S. is doing it, we should oppose it. But you've got to you got to start with the people on the ground. and, particularly the progressive forces and what they're saying. And so that's who I was listening to in Ukraine. And, if you look back in history, the U.S. been an imperialist power since its beginning, Manifest Destiny, the Monroe Doctrine, etc. But there are times when we took, the U.S. intervened and it was the right thing to do. In World War II, the what FDR called the Arsenal for Democracy armed the Soviet Union against the Nazis. Would we oppose that today?
Right.
The left in the 30s was saying the U.S. should arm the anti-fascist forces against Franco, who was backed by Hitler and Mussolini. Now, the U.S. didn't do that, but the left was saying we should have. Was Eisenhower wrong? And he actually did this in coalition with the Soviet Union to stop the UK, France, and Israel from taking over the Suez Canal from Egypt after Egypt nationalized it. We stopped that invasion. And you can find more examples. Even though the US is an imperialist power, sometimes imperialists do the right thing, maybe for the wrong reasons. And you shouldn't just base your decision on what the opposite of the US is doing. You got to look at the situation where it's happening, in this case, Ukraine.
I guess you were ahead of me because I didn't really have any knowledge of left activists in Ukraine. It's not that I didn't believe they were there. I just didn't have any knowledge of them until the invasion. And then I made a concentrated effort to find and see what they were saying, to find such activists. But one thing that's really stood out to me today is that without any exception, all those who say, no arms to Ukraine, NATO out of Ukraine, not a single one of those groups or individuals has made any effort in any way to see what the Ukrainian people, either the left or just the working class in general, what they're thinking and saying.
Yeah, it's disappointing that so many people on the left ignore what the people on the ground are saying. And it's not just in Ukraine, it's in Syria.
Right.
Even now in Iran, some people on this ideological left are saying that the U.S. is behind this uprising by this women-led movement for democracy and freedom. So you got to start with the people on the ground.
Right.
And, one of the ironies here is that, they call these pro-democracy uprisings color revolutions that they say are inspired by the CIA, as if the people on the ground who are fighting for their rights, don't exist. And, when is the left against revolutions, that are progressive? It's a big problem. And it's, as I said, I think at the top, this is a debate that's going around the left internationally.
Under Stalin, the communists around the world, they viewed every struggle in any country in the world, they viewed it just as a matter of geopolitics. How could this, that, or the other issue be resolved in the interest of the Soviet bureaucracy? And the peoples involved in those struggles were just pawns on the chessboard. That's why they call it the grand chess game, or the grand chessboard. And I think that given that Stalinism was the major force within the socialist movement for, ever since like the 1930s or 40s, that even the Trotskyists then started to adapt to that view and started to take it on, or most of them did. And that is what explains their viewing things in the way that you describe. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I think what we're dealing with is a legacy of Stalinism. And in that period, and the Marcyites do this too, who do come out of the Trotskyist movement, over 50 years ago. They look to nation states as the agents of change rather than the working classes, which is not, Marxism. It's not, or other forms, other currents of socialism, which, are oriented to the working class as the agent of change. So, in some ways, they really left the socialist left. And, I always liked Rosa Luxemburg's phrase, which I can't remember exactly, but she said, without democracy, there's no socialism. Without socialism, there's no democracy. And that's what's been lost. Mm-hmm. So that, if the state owns, the means of production, we have to defend it. But they're very selective. Saudi Arabia owns Aramco, but we don't call that a deformed worker state or whatever you want to call it. Right. So, the democracy piece of this has got to be central to our vision of socialism.
So, as a result of what has developed out of all this, you see this weird amalgam, what some people call the red-brown alliance, or an alliance between red communists and Hitler's brown shirts. And in my view, that has been a long time in the making. You had, for instance, that anti-globalization movement of Russia conference in 2014. And even before that, you saw, I don't know if you're familiar with that conference, but even before that, you saw that developing. So, and you see it, we're going to get into it, but I believe you see it much more clearly now. But anyway, how do you see the development of that so-called red-brown alliance? Do you see that as something fairly recent or something that's been developing for a period of time?
Well, it's been around a long time. I mean, it's a classic fascist tactic to adopt leftist verbiage and slogans to try to attract a broader base for their reactionary program. I mean, that's why Hitler called his party the National Socialist Workers' Party, Nazis. So, we got that right now with this Rage Against the War Machine demonstration coming up, which is definitely, red-brown politics, although it's not so much red. The old campus left, the United Anti-War Coalition, Answer, Black Agenda for Peace, Black Alliance for Peace, they're not participating. In fact, they're critical of it because there are these right-wing forces in that demonstration. Although it's ironic that people like in the United National Action Coalition, Anti-War Coalition, and the Workers' World Party and the Black Alliance for Peace participated in that anti-globalization movement conference in Russia back in 2014, which was clearly a red-brown affair. There were fascists from Russia, even the US, from around the world participating. The common denominator was they all opposed US-led Western dominance of the world order. But you're basically promoting right-wing politics, giving them a platform if you participate in this kind of nonsense. Now, this Rage Against the War Machine, it's not the ideological old left that's participating. It's podcasters and a paper party called the People's Party, which is more online than on the ground. And I think they're just being opportunistic. They're looking for a broader base. And, these podcasters that they've got on there, like Jimmy Dore, they denigrate anti-racist, feminist, gay liberation as divisive of working class unity, when the opposite is true. We won't have working class unity if we're divided by race and gender and sexual orientation. So unfortunately, the Green Party, by a narrow 54 to 50 vote of the National Committee, voted to endorse this. And I think that reflects opportunism as well. The Greens don't want to be left behind at what they, I think, mistakenly see will be a big demonstration. And, this demonstration is not really anti-war. That's the most fundamental thing. It's only against U.S. military aid to Ukraine. It's not against Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. None of their demands address that. And some of the speakers, like Scott Ritter, are actually for Russia, taking over Ukraine. So it's something peace activists and people on the left should stay away from.
So I see that the Code Pink, which is, I don't think they're explicitly socialist, but I think they would be considered to be on the left, that their leadership is against endorsing it, but that their most prominent spokesperson, Medea Benjamin, had originally been featured as the main speaker and wanted to speak at it had it not been for the position of Code Pink. So, and as we know, Code Pink and Medea Benjamin in particular, in practice, supports the Iranian dictatorship. So it seems to me that I believe Code Pink is the most prominent so-called peace and justice group in the United States. And it seems to me that they are a very prominent part of the Red-Brown Alliance.
Well, my take on that is, the younger staff apparently, got Code Pink to pull out, which is a good sign. The question I have, and I don't know the answer to it, is that staff only opposed to this demonstration because of the right-wing forces involved? And do they still hold to the position that Code Pink has, as articulated by Medea Benjamin, that the U.S. should use its leverage, military and economic, over Ukraine to force it into a land for peace deal with Russia, which is not anti-imperialist. It's having Western imperialists, the U.S. and NATO, get together with the Russian imperialists to carve up Ukraine. So I think Code Pink and the rest of the peace groups that have taken that position really need to rethink their position. If we allow a war of aggression by Russia to succeed in grabbing at least some of Ukraine, that gives a green light to other aggressors, other imperialist powers, including the U.S., which has, invaded countries like Iraq, which was as egregious as what Russia's doing in Ukraine.
So it seems to me that Code Pink, through Medea Benjamin, well, not only through her, but also through what's her name, the co-founder, Jody Evans, who was married to Neville Singham, who is a major investor in China and really is a representative of Chinese imperialism, and that they are deeply, deeply committed to supporting, amongst others, the Iranian dictatorship. And so I don't see how Code Pink can, as a whole, can really seriously pull back from that position without a major crisis in Code Pink, including, Neville Singham is, I believe, a major funder of Code Pink, and he's not going to pull back from that position. So how can they, and their staff, young, and maybe they're even idealistic, but they didn't come on staff, with their eyes closed. They must have known the general role of Code Pink. So how can they, well, let me put it this way. None of these groups had any problem with this Red-Brown Alliance so long as it was 5,000 miles away in Moscow. I'm talking about the 2014 conference. But when it comes right home and a spotlight is shined a little more clearly on it, then they have a problem because they're exposed. So I don't see any of them pulling back from their general politics, which is in effect covert, if not overt, support for Putin.
I think there's a lot of confusion in Code Pink. There's supporters in the peace movement generally. Code Pink, they would, and Medea Benjamin would deny she supports the theocratic regime in Iran, but she did go and basically give it political support by appearing or participating in a trip there that met with the leadership there. So that I think is confusing. And Neville Singham, I don't think he funds Code Pink. The Benjamin Foundation, which is Medea Benjamin's family foundation, I think provides most of the funding. But Singham does play in this milieu. He's a big funder of the People's Forum in New York City, which it seems to be close to the Party for Liberation and Socialism and Liberation. And yeah, he is a pro-Chinese campist, and he's using all the money he's made in the tech industry, including working with Chinese companies, using that money he made to fund things like the People's Forum. And I think the relationship with Jody Evans probably influences Code Pink to work with groups like the Party for Socialism and Liberation and its campus position. So I think it's more confusion than, conscious alliance with a red-brown alliance, or with, they always have disclaimers. They don't really support Iran. They just support a war against Iran by the U.S. and Israel, which I think we would support too, that position. Don't start that war.
Well, they can have disclaimers all they like. It's like the ones who say, well, no, we don't support Putin, but we just support the policies that will enable Putin to roll over Ukraine. So, I mean, I've never seen a serious criticism of the Iranian dictatorship. I've never seen them overtly support the revolution there. I've never seen, like, when they were there, it was at the time that human rights lawyer, I forget her first name, Sotoudeh, was in prison. They never brought that up, at least they never mentioned having brought that up while they were there on that particular visit. And shortly afterwards, Sotoudeh was sentenced, I think it was 100 lashes and 10 years in prison, something like that. So it's not a matter of what they say they do. It seems to me that their actions have served to support the Iranian dictatorship, and they're not 18-year-old children who don't know any better. So, I mean, I guess my question is, do you agree that in fact, in practice, they do support the Iranian dictatorship?
I think going on that junket to meet with the Ukrainian top officials did give support to the Ukrainian
You mean the Iranians, you mean?
Iranian regime. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think there's confusion there. I think that we got to be talking to the base that is influenced by Code Pink and explaining that, an internationalist position supports the pro-democracy movement in Iran and doesn't give cover to the regime. And the same is true in Ukraine.
Well, yes, but my experience talking to the people that support these groups, in all but a few cases, tends to be fairly futile.
Well, I think we just got to be patient and keep explaining. I do see people changing their mind on the Ukraine issue when they learn more about it and hear an internationalist perspective. It's not like there's been a sudden switch, but that can happen. I remember during anti-Vietnam War movement, the neighborhood or schools I went to, most of or a large number of the parents were, the fathers were working at that Fremont auto factory, and they were World War II veterans, and they were all very pro-Vietnam War until a little bit after Tet Offensive. And then, like a school of fish or a flock of birds suddenly changing direction, suddenly they were all against it. And I think, the anti-war movement was impacting them. It's just they wouldn't admit it until their friends admitted it, and suddenly they all changed their mind. So that's what I'm hopeful of. If we could just keep out there, putting our position out, explaining what's going on, we're going to win people over.
Well, there's been a long-term breach that I believe has widened over over several decades. A breach between the kind of what you could call the left activists and the big mass of working class people. And what you're describing about the Vietnam War is a shift in the view of the big mass of working class people. I think that the overwhelming majority of workers today support our view on Ukraine. But I'm talking about the left activists, including those around the different so-called socialist groups and those around groups like Code Pink. And yeah, I mean, I agree that if some of them might change their minds, but those that are really committed to these groups and their approach, my experience is it's been somewhat fairly futile.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the Stanley Aronowitz used to distinguish between the popular left of progressive and peace-minded people and the ideological left, which is organized into these groups. And I think you're right. The mass of progressive-minded people, they are sympathetic with the Ukrainians and think they should be supported and that the Russian invasion is wrong. It's in the ideological left where people have, as we were talking about earlier, they're looking at the geopolitical situation and not, the fight of the working class and oppressed people in Ukraine for their freedom. And the ideological or ideologically committed people are harder to persuade, no doubt. And I think, our task is to make sure that the popular left of progressive-minded people maintains its support for Ukraine. And but I think we also need to take on the ideological left because they one of the reasons it's hard to build a socialist left is that, from Stalinism and this Marxist campism, they defend the most odious regimes and give them political support. And then people think, well, if that's the left, I don't want anything to do with it.
Right.
And that's why, we need to have another voice out there. So the Ukrainian Social Solidarity Campaign and the Ukraine Solidarity Network, I think, can play an important role there in challenging the ideological left, to what their principles and positions really are, or should be.
That's why I was in favor of naming our group explicitly socialist, because I think that we can, I'm talking about the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign, because I don't think that together, us and the other Ukraine supporters, we're really going to be able to have much of an impact on the policies, let's say, of Joe Biden, or obviously, or not, or on Putin. But what we can do, I hope, is to start to play a role in the development of a new socialist movement.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's why I'm a member of the Ukraine Social Solidarity Campaign. And although I would disagree a little bit, I think that, the broader, progressive movement or people in this country, we need to keep messaging them, because as we go through this year, there's going to be at least Trump and probably others on the Republican side who are going to campaign as quote unquote peace candidates and saying, we should cut off aid to Ukraine. And most of them are saying redeploy it to the Pacific against China and to the southern border against immigrants, and maybe the tax breaks. And so that's going to be a debate there. It'll be a debate in the House of Representatives when the next round of funding for Ukraine comes up, probably later this year. And the polling shows, while on the progressive side, Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents are still supporting aid to Ukraine, it's eroded very little. On the Republican and Republican leading independent side, it's eroded enormously.
Right.
So that, that's going to be a political issue. So it's not just a debate within the ideological left. We got to maintain support in the popular left for support for Ukraine. And, we both know about this proposed resolution at the DSA chapter in Seattle, which calls for cutting off arms to Ukraine, and then going after the DSA supported members of Congress to get them to do the same position. So this is a debate that I think we can have some influence on, and we should at least try.
Well, I agree. I didn't mean to imply that we should just devote ourselves to, that we should just ignore, what happens in the wider society and in the wider working class. And here we get back. I mean, you see, for instance, Medea Benjamin is now tweeting, in effect, I believe, support for Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene. And she can deny all she likes that she's supporting the two of them. But when you send out messages supporting what they're saying on something, that is building support for them, which means it's going to inevitably mean building support for their politics. So what is your take on, I mean, is it not possible that people like Medea Benjamin and others, that they could provide a certain left cover, left respectability for the far right, people like Green and the Republicans, to start opposing sending arms to Ukraine?
Well, yeah, by making those tweets, she is providing, left cover. And I think and this gets back to the whole question of, Russian support for Trump and the far right in the US through influence operations. And I think a lot of people on the left, underestimate that danger and the danger from the far right in this country. So you'll get, people in that milieu saying, in some cases, Trump, even I think Jill Stein said it once in 2016 that Trump was the lesser evil to Clinton because he wasn't such a warmonger.
Right.
And the tolerance of the racism just in that kind of statement, Trump should be beyond the pale for what it means in this country for our domestic politics. And of course, the truth is Trump wasn't a warmonger or a peacemonger. He's an opportunist. He had no foreign policy. He was basically buffeted by the last person he talked to. So I think that is a position we should challenge. And, it's unfortunate that, there are some people on the ideological left that are, putting out crazy ideas like that, the far right here is not the real danger. Some of them say it's the neoliberal Democrats, imperialists, who are the greater danger. And I think, if you can't tell the difference between a party that wants to outlaw abortion and a party that wants to defend it, and saying there's no difference, or even that the Republicans might be the lesser evil on foreign policy, you're really not looking at, the real forces at play here.
Well, that brings us to actually the upcoming presidential election in 2024. And as you may know, for the first time in my life, I voted for a Democrat. Of course, I never voted for a Republican, but I voted for Biden in that election. And I'll probably do the same in 2024. That doesn't mean that I see the Democrats as being the salvation, as being the firewall against the Republicans. But anyway, I do see the main goal at this time as stopping the fascist connected Republicans. So what's your view of the upcoming elections and running like a left candidate, like a Green Party candidate or something like that?
Well, I agree. We want to oppose the Republican neo-fascist uh, trend and, defeat them. And a left party is running against them. So, I'm for running an independent left presidential candidate. I was that candidate in 2020. And I think there are three reasons why the Green Party should do it. First is just practical. The vote that the presidential candidate for the Green Party gets has an impact on their ballot status in 40 of the states. And having a ballot line makes it a lot easier to run local and state candidates, which is how the Green Party or another independent left party can really build its political base. So there's just that practical consideration. And then a second thing is, I think campaigns by the Green Party can influence the political debate and advance our program of eco-socialist and anti-militarist policies. The Green New Deal was the signature issue of the Green Party in the 2010s. I first candidate in U.S. to run on a Green New Deal, running for governor in New York in 2010, and it became the signature issue of the Green Party. Jill Stein ran on that theme in 2012 and 2016 for president, and many down-ballot candidates ran on it. And by 2019, the Democrats at least picked up the slogan and got the question into the national debate. Now, the actual policies that they put forward were greatly watered down from what the Green Party was talking about. But at least we advanced the debate. And then the third thing is, you run a campaign, you attract new people, particularly younger people. So it's a good organizing vehicle.
So that leads to another question. And that is, you mentioned having been active in the Peace and Freedom Party, now the Green Party, and the need for, I believe you talked about the need for a new left party in the United States. But isn't the question really a class question of two capitalist parties and the absence of a working class party?
Yeah, and the Green Party aspires to be that working class party. I mean, green is a metaphor for the environment, and green parties in Europe filled that lane in their politics, while there were basically social democratic parties and communist parties that tried to build their base in the working class and advance their issues. And a left party here needs to do both. And frankly, the Green Party, the rank and file and its leadership are more working class than most of the ideologically socialist groups, which are based on the campuses and in the college degreed or credentialed professions. But on the other hand, the Green Party is not organized to do the kind of organizing that we need to do to build that base on the ground, which I believe has to come from having local parties that are consistently active in street politics and electoral politics, and talks to the people in their communities. I mean, it's not enough to put your event out on social media because you're going to get the usual suspects. You got to go out and knock on doors and do what they call deep canvassing, where you're not there preaching so much as listening, finding out what people's concerns are, showing concern for them, and building a relationship and trust over time, so that then you have a basis for talking about policy. Because, I found doing that in local elections, a lot of people don't agree with many of the policies I propose, but they know me as somebody who's in the community consistently and takes the trouble to come by and talk to them. And they just respect that. Politics is a lot about guts. It's about whether people trust you and think, you're going to look out for their best interests. And once you have that trust, then you have the basis for, even challenging people on their policies in a way that's constructive and brings the conversation forward. So that's what I think is going to take to build a base in the working class. Working class people tend to be alienated, but I don't think apathetic. I mean, I just know this from, Teamsters I work with. A lot of them don't vote. But I'll tell you when, and I urge them to vote, but, they know I'm a political activist. When issues would be in the news, they would be coming to me when I got to work and asking me what I think about those issues in the news. So I think, they're concerned. They're just alienated from a political system where they only see, establishment people that don't care about them, can't even see them. And then we got the problem that most election districts in this country are one-party districts. They're not competitive elections because of gerrymandering and the winner-take-all single-member district system. So that we know who's going to win before the election even happens, because either the Republicans or the Democrats are the majority in that district. So the elections in a lot of ways are a farce. And I think these people understand that, or at least instinctively feel it. So I think we've got to be, if we're going to have a left party, it's got to be there at the grassroots, talking with people and building those relationships and trust. And some of those people will come to participate.
Well, I think words do matter. And I would say it's better to talk about a working class party rather than a left party. And in that light, it seems to me that a working class party will arise in part organically from a new uprising of the working class as a whole, or at least a major section of the working class, which we don't see at this time. And it seems to me that the different parties or groups that are struggling to be a party, including the Green Party, that they don't base their perspectives on that development itself. And connected with that, what are the perspectives for a new upsurge of at least a significant sector of the working class?
Well, on the perspectives, to me, that's kind of a mystery. You never know when these things are going to come, like Occupy. I was part of a call to go to Freedom Square in Washington that was issued before the call to go to Wall Street, basically on the same grounds. And the one in Wall Street, I think, took off because it was on TV that they kettled these young women, the police did, and then pepper sprayed them. And that really outraged people. It seems police brutality is the thing that really sparks a lot of movements, and including in Iran, as well as the United States. That's what we saw after George Floyd. So you never know when that, spark is going to light the fire. So I'm not predicting I don't have much perspective. I think what we got to do is just keep organizing and educating and, being ready when those movements come up. So that was the second part of your question. The first part was, the working class orientation. Yeah, I agree with you. I think when you're speaking to the popular left and the working class, you should use language like, we represent and want to speak for and organize the working class, rather than we want to organize a left. Because people don't vote for isms, they vote for, parties that they think are looking out for them. So I agree with you that the rhetoric should be more, we're a working class party than a left party.
But if we talk about ourselves as a left party, then that's how we think of things. And that influences a lot of what we do. So that's what I'm saying. Isn't it better to talk about a working class party than to talk about a left party?
Yeah, I basically agree with that. It's somewhat hard to separate them because, there are left theories, Marxism being the most dominant, that says, the working class is the agent of liberation. So they get intertwined, but I agree with your basic point that, we should be talking to people about building a working class party that people can identify with and participate in.
Right. And we should be talking amongst ourselves about that also, in my view. So I guess that's the main issues that I have. Is there anything else that you would like to comment on? Well, for one thing, now that you talked about, here's another question, is you talked about running as a Green Party candidate for president, yourself running. I assume that's what you're thinking. But what if to what extent does that vote of the leadership, to support the Rage Against the War Machine, to what extent does that vote represent the views of the Green Party as a whole, and what does that mean for people like yourself as far as your future in the Green Party?
Well, it's split right down the middle. And if anything, that motivates me to run again, to put a internationalist perspective and try to win that perspective in the Green Party as a whole. We got to be in solidarity with working and oppressed people around the world. And, that is really the Green Party tradition. The German Greens got started as a party that took neither side of the Cold War and fought the missiles in the Euro missiles crisis on both sides. And, people like Petra Kelly was prominent, and she would go over to East Germany. And at one point she was asking Honecker, the East German leader, to sign a disarmament pledge, and he didn't do it. But, they were challenging on both sides. And one of their leaders in the early Greens there was Rudy Barrow, who had been imprisoned as a critic of, quote unquote, really existing socialism in East Germany. And when he got out of prison and he went into exile in West Germany, he joined the Green Party. So that's the best Green Party tradition. And if I run, I would try to, win the Greens to that position. I think that'll be the hottest issue debated, because we're not really debating any other policy issues. But whether I run or not, I haven't decided. I mean, it's a huge undertaking to assemble a good campaign staff, raise enough money to support them, and the organizing you want to do, particularly the monster job of getting on the damn ballots in 51 different jurisdictions and trying to break into both traditional media and social media. So I don't want to run a half-assed campaign. If I do run, I'd have, seen that we can do that. So, and then there are personal considerations. There are other things I got going on and I could be doing. So I'm still, mulling that through in my mind. I haven't even really begun to talk to people about if we could pull that campaign team together, although there are a number of Greens urging me to run. So that remains to be seen.
Okay. So on that note, do you have any final comments?
No, I think we covered a lot of ground. We've almost been going for an hour. That's if this is transcribed, it's going to be a lot to read. So maybe we should just stop.
Okay. Well, thanks very much, Howie, for your time, and to be continued.
Yeah, and thanks for inviting me. And yes, to be continued.